Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tackling a story that is just absolutely fascinating. It perfectly captures this spectacular clash between a beautifully crafted Hollywood romantic myth and raw, verifiable open-source intelligence data. We're talking about the legacy of Brandon Lee. For decades now, the narrative surrounding his tragic passing on the set of The Crow back in 1993 has been defined by a very specific, deeply romanticized story. But recently, a comprehensive OSINT audit dropped and it revealed a startling disconnect between the man who actually lived and the character constructed after his death. Let's look at what the data actually says.
Okay, let's dive into this. Who is the real Brandon Lee? I mean, it sounds like a simple question, right? But the answer you get depends entirely on whether you're looking at posthumous stories or the actual documented evidence from when he was still alive. Today, we're going to strip away all those cinematic overlays and impartially follow the verifiable data. We want to uncover the grounded, complex reality of a man whose own voice was kind of overshadowed by a Hollywood myth. Section 1. El Mito de Hollywood. To really understand the significance of the data we're about to explore, we first have to ground ourselves in the official posthumous narrative. In this version, Brandon is portrayed as the ultimate devoted romantic, a man whose last words on set were literally about his desire to be a husband and father, a man who called his fiancée his immortal soulmate. It is a tragic, beautiful, almost cinematic love story, completely without shadows or contradictions. But when we contrast that with the documented reality uncovered in the 2026 audit, well, we find a much grittier, far more complex human being.
Moving right into Section 2, La Auditoría OSINT. Now, the information we're breaking down in this explainer comes from a massive 2026 open source intelligence audit. And it's absolutely crucial to emphasize right out of the gate that this investigation relies exclusively on public sources, verifiable records, and primary press data. There is no hearsay here, no unnamed insiders. We are strictly looking at undeniable primary documents to see exactly where the official story and the public record diverge without taking any sides whatsoever. Section 3. Brandon en sus palabras, in his own words. If we totally strip away everything written about him after 1993, what did Brandon Lee actually say about his own life, his passions, and his future? Well, in a 1991 interview for Showdown in Little Tokyo, Brandon stated, "I'm another person, and hopefully I'll have my own book to write." So the crucial point is, he was explaining his intense desire to not just be a carbon copy of his famous father, Bruce Lee. It's this brilliant metaphor for building his own independent legacy. Tragically, he died before he could finish writing that book himself.
Sección 4. Contradicciones del año 1992.
We're going to go through a rapid-fire sequence of interviews from 1992, literally the year right before his death. Take his quote from the rapid-fire promotional tour. Right at minute 7:49, Brandon outright says, Women, I don't understand women at all. So if you ever figure it out and you can bottle it and explain it to me, that'd be great." Just think about that context for a second. He is supposedly in the middle of this deeply serious, transcendent romance, yet publicly and humorously admitting he has absolutely no clue about women. It's a stark, humanizing contrast to the devoted romantic archetype pushed after his death. And the hits just keep coming. A 1992 NBC Dallas interview reveals a bohemian, intellectual rebel. He openly talks about being expelled from high school for being a poisonous influence. He talks about hitchhiking across America for months with a tent, literally trying to live out Jack Kerouac's On the Road. He even spent time at a Zen Buddhist monastery. I mean, this paints a picture of a spiritual, counterculture intellectual that is wildly different from the sanitized action star fiancé we were later sold. And what about his thoughts on the genre that actually made him famous? In that exact same rapid-fire interview, he said, "Action films are not real. At their best, they're usually entertaining. They're not particularly edifying." He was actively, explicitly distancing himself from the very genre the subsequent narrative would eternally tie him to. He just wasn't fully bought into the Hollywood machine. He was highly critical of it. And this brilliantly illustrates the disconnect. In a November 1992 interview, when asked about his real interests, Brandon enthusiastically quoted Oscar Wilde's The Ballad of Readingale, which is an incredibly dark poem about the death penalty and human suffering. But posthumously, the official narrative decided his defining literary reference was a romantic Paul Bowles quote from The Sheltering Sky, which they even placed on his gravestone. His actual 1992 words show a much broader, much darker literary universe. We see this pattern pop up again on British television in 1992. The presenter jokingly calls him a bad date because Brandon literally can't think of a single romantic thing he does. When pushed, he just casually mentions a story about my girlfriend. Notice the phrasing there. Not my fiancée, not her name, just a casual reference without any heavy engagement terms. It is totally relaxed and completely devoid of the theatrical romance that was added later.
Section 5. El contraste documentado.
Let's move to and see how this builds when we put the hard data points side by side. Check out this chronological overlap. On one hand, we have primary source documentation from screenwriter Shannon Bradley Collaery detailing a relationship with Brandon starting in April 1990 and lasting about a year while he lived in Echo Park. But simultaneously, the official narrative states he met Eliza Hutton in 1990 and they moved in together in 1991. We essentially have two verifiable timelines existing in the exact same year. It's an overlap no official source has ever bothered to objectively explain. Furthermore, out of all his verifiable interviews, there are only 2 instances where he actually mentions her. In one, he says, Liza, my fiancée, but you have to understand the context. This was specifically in response to a hypothetical question about what he would do if he resurrected like his character, Eric Draven. He immediately went back to discussing the fiction. On the flip side, during an Australian TV sign-off, he casually says, I just like to say hi to Lisa, my girlfriend who's waiting for me back at the hotel. One is a fictional character prompt, the other is an everyday sign-off. Neither resembles the grand immortal soulmate declarations pushed post-1993. So you might be wondering, where did the myth actually get cemented? Well, the official making of documentary for The Crow was finalized after his death, ending with an in memory of dedication. And it was precisely in this post-mortem environment that the romantic narrative and that sheltering sky quote were heavily emphasized and tied forever to his public identity. The narrative was constructed by the production and the estate after he was already gone. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is what Brandon actually felt about that character. In that very same making of documentary, Brandon says explicitly about Eric Draven, I think what he's doing is incredibly romantic, but he is not a hero for me. He actively maintained an intellectual distance from the character. He completely deconstructed the posthumous myth that he saw himself in Eric Draven, or that Draven's on-screen romance was a mirror of his own life. Which brings us to the ultimate takeaway of this explainer. Who gets to write a person's legacy after they die? The verifiable data shows us a rebellious, Kerouac-reading, deeply intellectual young man who just wanted to write his own book. The post-1993 narrative gave us a flawless, romantic action star perfectly mirrored in his final fictional role. When the documented reality and the constructed myth collide like this, it leaves us to ponder what else about the legacies we accept as fact is just a carefully edited version of a much more fascinating truth.